Okay, Representative Trott, I'd like to thank you for spending some time with us here at the Southeast Michigan 912 Tea Party Group. You've been involved in two House resolutions, House Resolution 3892 and House Resolution 4731. House Resolution 3892 is the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act of 2015. As a matter of fact, at our last meeting a few weeks ago, we handed out the full script of 3892 to our Tea Party members. And it's a very extensive bill. It's almost like a mini history lesson of the Muslim Brotherhood. I would like
Right.
to get your involvement within the bill and what do you see going forward with the bill?
Well, Gary, first, let me thank you for taking time to talk with me about these two important pieces of legislation. And I'm in my district office today in between meetings, and so it's great to be home. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk
Great.
about what's going on in Washington. I don't understand the administration's approach and decision making as it relates to the Muslim Brotherhood. They've always been a terrorist organization. They're a terrorist organization. The bill passed the Judiciary Committee it was a bipartisan vote. And I don't understand, we had Secretary Kerry in front of us a few weeks ago, and I asked him about the Muslim Brotherhood, and he gave me some namby-pamby answer and a nuanced answer saying, calling an organization a terrorist group has implications, and so we're carefully analyzing all the data information to make sure that we make the correct decision. Given what they've done around the world, particularly in Egypt, to the Coptic Christians there, it doesn't seem like a very difficult decision to me. So I hope the bill moves forward. The concern would be that if it ever got to the president's desk, what he would do with it. I am somewhat hopeful in that we put an awful lot of pressure on the administration and Secretary Kerry to call what's happening to Christians in the Middle East a genocide. We passed a bill in that regard. And then the day before the special envoy for religious minorities visited my district a week or so ago, Secretary Kerry finally came out and called what's happening there a genocide. So maybe similar pressure by Congress as it relates to the Muslim Brotherhood can get some results. But so far, the administration, and tell me if I'm, interrupt me if I'm talking too long, but
No.
the administration has an approach and a mindset. We've seen it now in Cuba. We've seen it with Iran. We've seen it with the Muslim Brotherhood. And the approach of the Obama administration is if we are nice and friendly to communist regimes or terrorist groups or rogue states like Iran, that by being nice to them, that will somehow cause them to rethink the United States of America and our role in the world and make them a productive member of the world community. Well, it hasn't happened since the Iran deal got signed on October 20th. Just today or yesterday, Fidel Castro wrote a letter about President Obama's visit. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, I did. Yes.
But that kind of sums it all up better than anything I could say, that this visit, they're basically thumbing their nose at us. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they think we are not going to lead on this issue, and Congress is trying to get the administration to do what they should do.
A couple meetings ago, we Skyped in former Representative Pete Hoekstra. And Pete writes for the Investigative Project on Terrorism with Stephen Emerson. And they wrote a terrific article about the United Kingdom deeming the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization after an 18-month study. Did you guys take any cue from that, or was that some of your reasoning for going forward with this resolution?
Yeah, so it's not just the United Kingdom. I think Saudi Arabia, I
Correct.
think
Yeah.
several other countries around the world, and I forgot the exact number, but that was in our legislative briefing materials that was accompanied with the bill. And the fact that other nations who haven't always led on the world stage have already taken action as it relates to the Muslim Brotherhood is relevant, because it tells us, well, we should be doing the same thing. Pete has great insight to these matters, as former chair of the Intelligence Committee.
Yes.
Very thoughtful guy, very insightful on national security issues, and so I'm sure having him Skype with your group was probably more beneficial than having me. But that's a good insight, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Now, with the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act, Along with that comes CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, ISNA, Islamic Society North America, and the North American Islamic Trust. I think you've got that within the resolution. So let's say this bill passes. Is that a point where we can start scrutinizing CARE and ISNA and so on? Because their activities, especially here in Michigan, is huge. Their presence is felt, in the halls of Lansing all the way to the halls of DC. Would that put pressure on those groups to disband them or deport them, or what does the bill specifically state there?
Yeah, there's no question if the bill were to pass and be signed into law by President Obama, that would give us even a greater ability to scrutinize various groups. But realistically, I think if the bill gets to the president, well, first, if the bill gets out of the Senate, that would be great. The Senate, the joke I like to say is, George Washington didn't want the Senate to do anything very quickly. He wanted the Senate to be a deliberative body, and he'd be very proud of them today. Do anything very quickly. But if the bill were to get out of the Senate and end up in the president's desk, even if he does not sign it, we can still look at different groups and introduce different resolutions in Congress to try and draw attention to the activities. And so in that regard, if there's anything that you think I should try and champion, assuming this bill doesn't pass. Now, any bill or resolution we might introduce in the House with respect to the groups you mentioned will also not probably be signed by the president if it got to his desk. But it doesn't mean we can't generate some publicity and some focus on the discussion surrounding any such legislation. So, sometimes creating a dialogue around these issues is as important as actually getting something enacted into law.
Yeah.
And why groups like yours are so important, and I applaud all of your efforts and your work to keep us safe and protect our republic, because no one in the Obama administration seems to be doing it.
I know, along with yourself, Representative Bishop and Representative Candace Miller have co-sponsored the bill. I called Representative Justin Amash the other day, and I'm not in their district, of course, so I'm not sure if my comments mean anything. But I mean, we would like to, as our group and as we speak to other groups, try to pressure our other representatives within Michigan to look at this bill or resolution and co-sponsor it. Does that mean a lot when you get a lot of co-sponsors?
It does, and you're on the right track. And this is my first term, as you know, Gary. So I'm right. And I didn't have an appreciation when I first got there as to how important the number of co-sponsors is. And in a perfect world, you have a bill that hits the House floor or it passes out of the House. But when it comes to the floor, you've got 300 co-sponsors, bipartisan, and those are the kind of bills that leadership will schedule for a vote, maybe over some other bills that don't have as many co-sponsors. So, a lot of people, I have meetings in D.C. and the meetings are, 15 minutes long, and they're with groups that are intending to advocate on an issue like the Muslim Brotherhood issue. And a lot of times the ask in the meeting is, would you sign on as a co-sponsor? And that's a lot of what those meetings are about. And again, it's to drive up the number of co-sponsors on the bill, to get leadership, to put pressure on leadership to schedule a vote on the bill on the House floor. Mm-hmm. And then also maybe to even send a message to the administration, hey, this is something even Democrats feel strongly about. You should really look at doing this. And so I think the more co-sponsors, and I'd be happy to talk to Justin and ask him to look at co-sponsoring it. It seems like a type of bill that he would co-sponsor, and maybe just no one's asked him yet.
So even though I might have, I'm not in Representative Amash's district, do they kind of weigh that call a little bit and saying, hey, we got 10 phone calls today. They're not all within your district, but people are concerned.
Yeah.
So that does help.
They absolutely do. So the first day back, so when we go back, we'll go back on a Tuesday afternoon. I have a meeting at 5 o'clock with my staff, and before we vote, and I get a report, metric of all the different calls we've gotten on issues, pro and con, all the different letters we've received, and there are thousands of letters, not just hundreds, thousands of letters on different issues, on different bills. So even if you can't get a meeting with Justin, which is hard to do because he's I don't think he meets with that many folks, but even a letter to his office would be noted, or should be noted by his staff, and they should discuss what people are telling them. And again, that wouldn't be necessarily district centric. It would be just you got 1,000 letters asking us to co-sponsor the Muslim Brotherhood bill. And if I get that information, I look at my legislative director and say, let's look at this bill, and if we're not on it, you should tell me why we shouldn't be on it, because there seems to be a lot of people concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that when we make our travels to the various Republican clubs or various conservative Tea Party groups, maybe we can get them to sign on as a club or group, and that would be more ammunition than when we send a letter and such. So,
absolutely. I can't, this seems to me to be, should be a bipartisan issue. I can't imagine why the Muslim Brotherhood hasn't been designated as a terrorist group. So,
yeah, they walk the halls of D.C., correct? I mean, from what I've read and trying to educate myself about the Muslim Brotherhood, they've been very active since the George Bush days.
Well, they even walk the halls of the State Department.
Yes, yeah.
They got a meeting with John Kerry, which I don't understand why.
Yeah. And speaking of that interaction that you had with John Kerry, you were asking him some questions and such. You asked about the Coptic Christians, which in your district, I have quite a few families living within your district that are Coptic Christians. And with them saying it is now genocide with the Christians, that's a big deal, I think, because we know and we'll get into the refugee resolution, we're not bringing in Christians through these programs. So it's a very small percentage. So
it's interesting.
It's great.
The Christians represent, I think, 10% of the Iraqi population, and less than 2% of the folks that have been let in through refugee resettlement are Christians. So for some reason, they're being disproportionately allowed in. Mm-hmm. I had a theory. I have a theory, and if you have folks in your country in the Middle East that you'd like to have resettled other places around the world because they're refugees, would you rather authorize and send off a Muslim refugee or a Christian refugee? And that's really the Christians aren't harming anyone.
Right. Yeah.
They're not. No one's perfect, but the Christians, by and large, aren't creating some of the problems around the world that we see today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, if we can then talk about House Resolution 4731, which is the Refugee Program Integrity Restoration Act, which you, again, Representative Bishop and yourself have co-sponsored and voted for. So it's gone out of the House Judiciary Committee. So then the next step is voting it on the House floor. Is that the process that these bills or resolutions go through?
Yeah, that'll be the process. And again, I think it's a piece of legislation that should have bipartisan support. I was surprised that some of the Democrats, when we took the bill up in the Judiciary Committee, spoke out against it. And they, of course, John Conyers led the charge. And their reasoning is that this is just another effort by the Republicans to undermine refugee resettlement, and refugees that make up the fabric of our nation, and we're a country of immigrants, and they go down that explanation to attack us on it. In my mind, it really is. I'm all about the 10th Amendment. The federal government doesn't do things very well, and I think state and local officials should have the authority to decide when and how many refugees they want resettled into their communities. And so that legislation just gives those decision makers, if they take action to say they don't want any folks resettled in their community, the federal government has to respect that. And that seems like a common sense solution. And a lot of communities have a lot of challenges, and even forget the security issue.
Correct.
Having thousands of refugees resettle in the community. They don't have the wherewithal to take care of the people in their city today, much less new folks that are trying to settle there. So I think it's a good bill. I'll support it when it gets to the House floor. Again, just like the first bill we talked about, I'd be surprised if the president signs it. His plan on refugees is different than Congress believes should what happened. So I don't quite understand the president's plan. I heard someone recently say on TV that his plan with respect to immigration and refugees is to so populate the country that we'll ever elect another Republican president. Maybe that's the ultimate goal of his immigration plan, but I don't agree with anything he's doing.
Yeah, your picture's just a little garbled and speech is a little garbled.
Sorry.
I'm not sure. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you sure are. Yeah. So,
Okay, because your picture's just a little fuzzy. Speech is just a little fuzzy. But just to ask concerning the Refugee Integrity Restoration Act, so it's giving states more control over the refugees coming into each individual state.
well, it's giving them control over deciding whether they even want to accept any refugees.
Okay, all right.
And so it's
In my opinion, and I don't know if you heard what I said a minute ago very clearly, but a lot of communities forget even the security issue. A lot of communities have many challenges of taking care of their residents and their citizens today, and so they may decide, aside from security concerns, we don't have the resources to feed and to educate 5,000 refugees from Syria. We can't handle any people right now.
Right.
And communities and states, if they take action to so indicate that they don't have the capacity or willingness, then that should be respected by the federal government.
Yeah, the president just came out within the last few days or so that he wants to bring in 100,000 refugees. Is Congress going to stand up to that and just say no? I know it's a federal program, it's a legal program, but here in Michigan, we're the #1 per capita state in the country in receiving refugees. Just like you mentioned with the cost factor, which is huge, because the federal government only takes care of them for like 3-4 months, and then it's the state's responsibility to take care of these people.
Right.
And we just is Congress really going to fight back against that?
Well, we have, and again, what we've done won't solve the problem, but it's certainly an effort to try and solve the problem. I've co-sponsored legislation to let Congress have the responsibility of approving the administration's refugee resettlement plan. Again, it's unlikely that the president would sign that bill because it would be giving the authority to Congress to decide how many refugees we're going to let in.
Mm-hmm.
And then we passed the SAFE Act, and we had Director Comey from the FBI testify before us. And he's really the person that triggered his testimony. And he's not a political appointee. He's appointed for 10 years as director of the FBI.
Right.
His testimony is what triggered that legislation. And in his testimony, he said, we really don't know much about or anything about the refugees coming over from Syria, because unlike Iraq, we do not have the background information and the resources on the ground and the boots on the ground to tell us anything about these people. And therefore, it will be very difficult to properly vet and decide if any of these people are terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
Based on that testimony, the House introduced and passed very quickly the SAFE Act, which requires that before we let a refugee in, that a more extensive background check be completed. For example, why not check their social media? The administration was not checking the refugee's social media account to determine if there's anything on there that would alert us that they intended bad things for American citizens. But do more extensive background checks, and then required, I believe it was the director of the FBI and the director of immigration, to certify that those background checks have been done and that nothing revealed a threat or danger to U.S. to allow those folks in. The president's not going to sign that bill. I, for the life of me, don't understand the president's thinking, because if something happens, and something's going to happen, unfortunately, we've seen the tragedy last week in Brussels. something is going to happen, and I predict something will happen before President Obama leaves office on our soil again, not just San Bernardino, but something else will happen. And if somehow that incident is the result of a refugee who resettled here,
Yeah.
or the result of someone being released from Guantanamo,
Yeah.
that has to taint the president's legacy. That's under the president's watch. That's not something Congress did. That's not something Sheriff Mike Bouchard dropped the ball on. That's the president pursuing a policy that put our citizens in danger. If I was president of the United States and I was a liberal Democrat like President Obama, when the SAFE Act was passed by the House, I'd say I'm going to sign it because it takes me off the hook.
Right. Yeah.
But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to forge ahead, and I think ultimately it will be during his administration, before he's done, or certainly afterwards, the historians will be very critical of his policy in that regard.
It's funny you bring up the SAFE Act. I was in my car this morning, and I heard Representative Brian Babin on Breitbart Radio, and he was talking about this, about House Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee to include language in their upcoming spending bill. So that's what you're talking about. That was back in November. So that bill, which was, let's see, HR 4038. So that is different than HR 4731. So it's
Right.
two different
Two different-
resolutions that are trying to stop refugees from coming in without proper vetting.
And all the SAFE Act really did was ask the administration to put a pause on its refugee resettlement program in light of what happened in San Bernardino.
Okay.
And in light of Director Comey's, in Director Comey's comments that we really don't know anything about these refugees coming over from Syria, I thought the administration might actually get behind the bill. They didn't. But Brian Babbitt from Texas is a good guy. He's a dentist, but his son was a
Right.
Navy SEAL and wrote a very fascinating book about his experience as a Navy SEAL and leadership. And
Yep.
he's a smart guy, very articulate member of our Republican caucus.
So there's just talking with you and knowing kind of a little bit, from my experiences, Washington D.C. is just like a big bowl of soup, and it's not really good vegetable soup. Everybody just keeps throwing in this, throwing in that, and you hope something good comes out of it. And you guys are being pulled this way and that way. Do you just try to zero in on a couple main things and just focus on that? Or, there's just so much going on in the country. It's got to be tough.
I describe what we're doing in Washington today as I don't know if you're a college basketball fan, but there was a coach at the University of North Carolina named Dean Smith many years ago, and he had something called the Four Corners offense.
Right.
So when
Yeah.
the Tar Heels would get ahead in the game, they would just put out two guards and forwards on the four corners of the court and just pass the ball around to run out the clock. They could win, and that's really what we're trying to do with President Obama. We're trying our best in Congress, using every resource we can. We're suing the president. We're holding up on his nominations in the Senate. The Senate's not doing its part, but the House is doing its part. We're trying to use the power of the purse to keep the president from doing things he shouldn't, or taking unconstitutional actions. And really what we're trying to do is just run out the clock and get to a new president.
Okay.
And I will tell you, and I've heard this from Democrats, President Obama, forget his policies. I disagree with most every policy that he's promulgated in his 7 years as president. But most Democrats will even tell you he's a lousy leader. He never spent the time, either was too arrogant or too confident to believe he had to invest the time to develop a relationship with Congress so that we could work together. And he perhaps has never read the Constitution, because there's an Article 1, there's Article 2, and he never read Article 1. And it's supposed to be 3 branches of government. And he has not spent any time to try and develop a relationship with Congress and even the Democrats in Congress. And that's the root of all of our problems. And,
Yeah.
you know, people talk about all the problems. There's a lot of different issues in Washington that undermine our effectiveness. But I will tell you, whoever the next president is will do a better job of working with Congress, and we will see more things get done than we did under this president. I'm completely confident of that. And as much as you will probably cringe when I say this, Gary, even someone like Hillary Clinton, who would be a terrible president, in my opinion.
You made me cringe.
I warned you. Someone like Hillary Clinton will understand the importance of getting Congress, a Republican-controlled Congress, to work with her to get things done, and we'll get better results under her, potentially, not good results, but better results than we did under this president. And please don't take that as any kind of willingness to have Hillary as our president, because that will be a bad thing as well.
Well, that just shows you how bad we are right now, you know, if she's going to be a little bit better. But, hey, I really appreciate you joining us and clarifying some of the information on these two resolutions. I'd like to take you up on our refugee resettlement PowerPoint presentation to you one day when you got that extra half hour in your home office. Be glad to come by. We'd love to do that and show you what we're working on. And as a matter of fact, too, in Michigan, we got some good news over the weekend. Representative Jim Runstead has introduced 2 bills on refugee resettlement, very similar to what you've got in your Integrity Restoration Act, as far as giving the communities more control and to trying to stop the flow of refugees from coming into Michigan, just because of the cost factors and security factors too. So, hey, thanks a lot for joining us. Let's stay in contact.
I was with Jim when he was talking about those bills. I knew he was going to introduce those bills in the State House.
Oh, okay.
And they're good bills, and they're good bills also because they give us a basis give Michigan a basis potentially for challenging the president and the federal government on their resettlement program. So I think it's I applaud him for doing it, and I'm happy he's doing it. And again, I appreciate you taking time to talk with me, and I look forward to meeting with you. And I just thank you for everything you're doing for our country. And I hope you'll call me, as I suggested. I hope you call me when you have questions, and also give me a call when you disagree with what I'm doing, because I need to hear that.
Yeah, no problems there. You know, just stay the fight and keep us on the right track and preserve our freedoms for us. That's all we ask. So good being with you, and we'll see you down the road real soon.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Representative. Take care.